It's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, welcoming you to another episode of VETchat. As you are probably aware, regeneration, environmental regeneration and sustainability is a big part of what we like to talk about on VETchat and also at the Webinar Vet. And today I think we've got somebody who will really add to that conversation. It's Dr. Carbon from Australia. It's Jeremy Watson. Jeremy's been talking for a long time about how to be carbon neutral. In fact, I think his practice was the first carbon neutral practice in Australia. Obviously, carbon neutrality is part of the puzzle, but we're all trying to push towards net zero, or at least some people are. Some people are now pushing away from net zero, so I think that's also interesting. And of course, also Jeremy's practice, Brimbank Veterinary Clinic in Melbourne, was the winner of our small practice veterinary green award for this year, 2025. So, Jeremy, so pleased to have you on. It was great also to see you. I was over in Australia last month in September, and we had some good times at Vet Expo. So great to see you again, albeit virtually. How's it going in Australia? How's the weather doing?
Yeah, good. Hi, Anthony. Look, thanks very much for inviting me on to the show. Yeah, weather's been a bit wild today. We've recorded the hottest day ever in October in Sydney today,
Yeah.
and some pretty wild weather down south. So yeah, it's certainly we're getting. Unfortunately, we're getting a bit more used to extreme weather, which is underpinned by a changing
Mm.
climate, as we all know.
Yeah, I think we had our warmest and driest, certainly our warmest. I think it was pretty dry. Summer recorded in the UK in 2025. Of course, people sometimes confuse weather and climate because obviously weather is something that when you draw the curtains, you look out and you see it's sunny, it's wet, it's windy. Climate is something that we look at over a longer period, and I think it's more and more irrefutable that the evidence is suggesting that the planet is warming, and cause and effect. The obvious one is looking at greenhouse warming gases in the atmosphere, like carbon. So, tell me, what piqued your interest? When did you start getting involved in this as I need to be doing something about it personally, and then how did that translate into moving your practice to a net zero, a carbon neutral practice, being the first one in Australia. So perhaps tell us a little bit about that journey first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, look, well, with as a vet, as a scientific training, the science of climate change has always been pretty clear to me, and I've always been interested in sustainability. And I had the opportunity to rebuild my practice in 2011. We're a 6-vet small animal practice in northwest suburban Melbourne, and so I was able to use an architect who specialises in sustainable design, and that gave us a practice that had a whole lot of sustainable features, which made it a really much better place to work, much better place to visit, and it was cheaper to operate. And so we started adding some solar panels, and then I was looking to try and share some of the learnings from the benefits of a sustainable practice. And then in 2019, connected up with the newly formed Vets for Climate Action in Australia, and found that there was a whole other group of vets who were interested in the same thing. And out of that has grown the what we call the Climate Care Program, which is a 6-module program of sustainability and net zero, specifically designed for vet clinics.
It's interesting, isn't it? Once you've got a community, that really helps you. If you're on your own, it can be a bit of a depressing place because you think you're the only one bothered about this. Our journey's very similar because I set up a practice in 1997, and it was on my housing estate, which was the biggest in Europe at the time, but it was quite a small building. And it wasn't until 2008, 2009, I bought a couple of buildings, put them together. The banks were all very supportive of it, but then the bank crash came. Suddenly they weren't wanting to lend me all the money, but I was still convinced I wanted to do it as sustainably as possible. And at that time, I put the most energy efficient boiler in. I had LED lighting, which nobody was really talking about in 2009. Motion sensors, obviously trying to insulate as best I could and things. So obviously there's an expense to some of those things, but eventually that also saves you money as well, doesn't it? I mean, when I'm don't own the building, well, I don't own the practice anymore because, of course, Webinar Vet came around in 2010. I had sick parents, so eventually I sold the practice in 2011 to two mates. It's now corporate. Been trying to get solar on the roof for the last few years without a lot of success. But obviously, solar is a lot more accepted. The story is a lot easier to tell in Australia. You get more sun, it's warmer. A lot of practices have solar in Australia, but you would have been putting that in the mid 2010s, I presume. So about 10 years ago, you've had it on your practice. And is that solar thermal PVs? How do you work that? Do you have a battery? Talk to us a little bit about your solar array.
Yeah, I guess just backtracking a little bit, the putting on the solar panels really kind of started the whole journey to net zero in our practice.
Mm.
We put on we had a 10 kilowatt system to start with. We saw the benefits of that. We added another 10 kilowatts. Prices continued to come down, and so we added another 10. So we've now got the entire roof a 30 kilowatt system, which provides pretty much all of our electricity for a year. Uh, Obviously, in the 3 or 4 months in winter when we have to buy some from the grid, but effectively we can generate the total amount the practice uses in 1 year. And so I was about 2018 or so. I was thinking, well, we must be carbon neutral. And then I started to look into it a bit and found that actually there's quite a bit more to it than just solar panels and energy supply. And
Yeah,
so out of that, I decided to have a full carbon audit done through a organisation called Climate Active, which is the Australian government net zero registry, and they're
yeah.
quite rigorous in how you go about that. And so out of that, we became carbon neutral. And that, as much as anything, was just to find out what it was about, because no one seemed to have done it. And probably my thinking's evolved a little bit since that time. But certainly a big part of it, and the easy wins are with your solar panels and energy system, absolutely. And particularly in Australia, we've got a lot of sunshine, so that's the low hanging fruit.
So talk to me a little bit about, do you then have electric cars? Do you power your cars off your panels? Have you gone for a battery yet? Because having said that, with a veterinary practice, most of the energy is used in the day. And of course, unless you're an emergency centre, you close the practice down. So I suppose the energy that you're using of an evening is just kind of running fridges and the bits and pieces.
Yeah, look, we absolutely prioritise trying to use as much electricity during the day as possible. We've set and going all electric, so we've just disconnected all our gas appliances and replaced them with the new generation heat pump, and that's actually saved us money because gas is becoming more and more expensive. We can use reverse cycle air cons to heat instead of using gas heating. So just making those changes immediately saw financial benefits, and then really your introduction to batteries has been through cars. Really, two of us have had Teslas for now 3 or 4 years, and so we can plug those in at work once a week, fill up for effectively about $5 for 400 kilometres when you're using surplus solar from the roof. So that's just an obvious saving.
And would you say, I mean, I've had solar on my roof at home for 18 years. I've had PVs for about 10. I've had battery for about 2 years. I just did it because it was the right thing to do. I've always been, very, I love the environment and so on, and the animals and so on. Obviously, there's a business case now. Have you come from it more from a business case, or has there always been that kind of love of environment and understanding of that? Because I think now more and more people are not, still doing solar. Certainly in the UK, I think on veterinary roofs, it's still quite a low percentage. I know about 40% in Australia. It makes business sense now, doesn't it, to do it? And this is where, we should be pushing more and more to get practices to do it because, what's there not to like about saving money?
Yeah, look, I've sort of come at it from both points of view, and I've always been passionate about sustainability and making a better long-term future from a sustainable environmental sustainability point of view. But I'm also interested in business and making successful business, and really solar panels just ticks the boxes because currently it's probably about a 5-year payback in Australia, and the system's now lasting up to 40 years. So you get basically, in our practice, probably a couple of $100,000 worth of free electricity over the life of panels or more. And the other interesting thing now is that batteries are going the same way as solar panels. So it was uneconomic 3 years ago. It's now economic. We put in a battery last year and see continued savings. And the other thing in Australia, of course, is that because there's so much rooftop solar now, it's changing the dynamics of the grid, and consequently the grid doesn't want surplus power at certain times in the sunny months, and they
Yeah,
won't pay you for it. And so you have to look at using it, putting it into your car, putting it into your battery so you can sell it back at night. And so we have now what's called virtual power plants, and I've signed up to one of those. And so the power companies can aggregate from people's batteries at night, sell it back into the grid if there's a price spike, and pay you a premium for it. So the grid's changing a lot, and you
yeah.
really need to have batteries and panels now to be taking advantage of that.
And I think it is really interesting because, we've just seen a price increase on electricity, I think, coming in this month. Electricity and gas very expensive since the Ukraine war in Europe, in the UK. And yet, my company said, well, we're green, good energy are not increasing their prices. And of course, I think now it's a kind of fact that green energy is cheaper than gas or oil or coal based energy, because obviously once you paid the capital cost, I probably make a 20% return on my investment from 10, 20 years ago. It's money that I'm getting instead of giving it to the greedy energy companies, which actually makes me feel quite good about myself as well. Quite smug in a way. It's also interesting because I know from the award that you won with Webinar Vet Screen Awards, you are obviously going out and doing a lot of education of this, aren't you, at the various conferences as well, talking about it. 40% have got solar on the roof, and that's part of the equation, obviously. But I know, for example, over the last 12 months, as part of the award, you said you'd reduced the amount of anesthetic usage, the amount of anesthetics that you're pumping into the atmosphere by 80%. We all, I think, are knowing that story now that, isoflurane is 500 times the greenhouse warming potential of CO2, etc. Is that sort of obviously at some point you can't do that anymore, but also your oxygen generator, these are all things that there's a capital cost up front, but actually once it's paid back, it's free oxygen. It's less isoflurane, sevoflurane, whatever you're buying as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I guess as a general overall principle, just going all electric is a key theme,
Yeah,
and then grabbing your power from renewable sources, ideally solar panels if you can, but then grabbing the renewable energy that's coming into the electricity grid is certainly a significant opportunity. And we're finding that things like we disconnected our gas dryer and put an industrial electric dryer, which did a much better job, and it's cheaper to run. So it's kind of like win-win. So even if the appliance hasn't come to the end of its life, it's still cheaper to actually not run it for the full length and get the new appliance and reduce your emissions. But I think it sort of comes back to when you talk about anesthetic gases, and there's a lot of things that start spinning around in your head about the amount of plastic waste that we generate in practice, et cetera, et cetera. And what I guess I'm pushing is that if you actually start measuring your carbon footprint, you can find that all the waste streams in your practice have some sort of carbon value. And so you can
mm,
identify these different carbon numbers and then start to prioritize which ones that you can reduce. And the easiest ones to reduce are the ones you have control over, and that's your scope 1 and 2. And that's we call it your gig, your gas, your isoflurane, and your grid electricity. If you do those three things, you measure them, you look at the systems that underpin each emission. So it's your energy system with your gas and your grid electricity, or if it's your anesthesia, is the anesthetic gas is the problem. Have a look at your whole anesthetic system, and that's what we did in our practice. And initially, everyone says, "Well, just turn down your flow rates," and so we did that, and we got about a 10% reduction. And then we went back and measured our footprint the next year, and it had gone up because the practice had grown. We'd been focused on other sustainability issues. So we went back and looked at our whole anaesthetic system, right from the discussion with the client to the admission, the pre-meds, the induction agents, the maintenance agents, the analgesia, and we looked at the whole lot, and we made a number of changes, and we've now cut our anaesthetic gas use down by about 80%, and we're doing much better anaesthesia than we used to. And we've developed some new profit centres, and so it's just kind of like win-win-win. And
Mm.
so I think that's the thing about the whole looking at your carbon footprint. It's about systems review,
Yeah.
reviewing the systems that underpin each item. And we learned that from COVID, that once you do a systems review, you can immediately see that there's better ways of doing things even before you start to put a carbon lens on things.
Mm. And I know in Australia at the moment you've got the Vets for Climate Action 0 October. Tell us a little bit about how that works and how well received you think it is within the veterinary profession. Is that something that's becoming mainstream, or is it still at early adopter stage?
I think we're only in our second year, and it's still at an early adopter stage. It's difficult to get the resources to do the widespread promotion you need to get these things going. But the idea is that we have an annual month where we come back and look at our carbon footprint. We get practices to start measuring and sharing and collaborating, and we
Mm.
get some activities in the veterinary team, and also use that as a means to promote to your clients and build a bit of value for the practice from your sustainability efforts. So it's really looking at, basically, we're encouraging practices to do three things: measure their footprint, and there's only three items we want them to start with: your gig, gas, isoflurane, grid electricity. Have at least one team activity, and one that's really popular is an e-waste recycling collection for the whole team and the practice.
Mm.
Everyone's got e-waste at home they want to get rid of, so the team loves that. And then one social media post minimum. So that could be just pictures of your team enjoying their e-waste recycling day, but making that connection between the long-term future of animal health and climate health, and the connection there. So that's where we're aiming for this year. So it's still in its infancy, but we're looking to grow it each year and make it an annual event.
Fantastic. Jeremy, explain to me, we've just done an initiative with Covetrus in the UK where they've been collecting e-waste, and interestingly, believe it or not, gets sent to the Royal Mint, which makes all of our coinage. Obviously, less coins around now, so they need to diversify. And they either repurpose the computers, phones, etc., and sell them on, or they boil everything down, and then of course they can take the precious metals away, and they turn that into non-extractive jewelry. So it's a really lovely circular model. And actually, Covetrus have said that if there's any money made, they'll donate that to us for our green funds for supporting green projects, mainly with Lancashire Wildlife Trust. But obviously, as it grows, we can diversify that a bit. So where does your e-waste go to? They've collected it in. Who picks that up then, and how is that valued and so on? Because of course we talk about e-waste, but of course I was at a waste conference last year, and it was interesting. They said actually, there's no such thing as waste. There's just resource that nobody's quite worked out how to get a value out of. So everything has value, doesn't it? But yeah, what happens once everybody's picked up the waste and it's in the practice?
Yeah, that's something that's still evolving. We've trying a number of different companies that have certified, particularly with computer equipment. So
Yeah,
they'll certify the data removal, and
yeah,
if the equipment's still serviceable, they'll. So, for example, we did a changeover from server-based to cloud-based system in our practice, and all of a sudden there's, I don't know, 15 screens that are perfectly
yeah.
serviceable that won't work. And so that sort of thing can be repurposed. And so we sent that off to a company that actually certifies that they've cleaned all the data off and found new use for it. And
Yeah.
then things like cables and that sort of thing obviously can be taken apart. Interesting when you talk about waste as a resource, and one of the courses that I did through Cambridge University does short courses, the Institute of Sustainable Leadership, and through one of those courses they were talking about the amount of lithium in urban waste,
Yeah.
that the actual concentration of lithium in per ton of urban waste is greater than in the actual ore that they mine to get the lithium in the
Yeah.
first place. Which, there's just lithium in everything that we have these days, from toothbrushes to mobile phones to kids' toys. It's so much part
And
of
in the
what goes
vapes,
in the
of
landfill.
course, and those vapes get thrown in the bin and go into recycling places, and they actually blow up and cause fires and things. So
Mm,
there's a danger element as well as a waste of that lithium.
absolutely, yeah.
When I was looking at the awards, although I wasn't involved in judging, but it's always interesting to read them. I think one of the things that you did really well was the whole gamification to make it interesting for the team, because sifting through waste to see if you put them in the right bag could sound like a real pain. So perhaps tell us a little bit about how you've made it interesting to get teams involved, because I think it's easy for somebody like yourself, a head vet in a practice, to say we're going to do this, and so you talk about it being top up, but you need people at all levels to really buy into it. Otherwise, it becomes a real struggle, doesn't it? So how have you managed to do that?
Yeah, look, that's certainly been one of the more challenging elements of the sort of, I guess, our evolution of our net zero program. And again, was out one of these courses that they talked about how gamification can be a very powerful way of changing behaviour and attitudes in a team.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm interested in is, and particularly having done presentations to vet students, they're all worried about where their future's headed. Would you be interested in getting involved in a movement that's continually depressing about everything's getting worse and you can't ever fix everything, et cetera, et cetera? Or can we sort of somehow throw it around and say, well, how can we make this whole process that we're going to have to live with for the rest of our life a bit more fun, a bit more interesting, a bit more creative, and so that people like doing it, and then more people are going to come and join us. That's the kind of overall theory. And so, to give you an example, we've our practice is actually now part of the CVS group, which is as you know, a UK-based group, and we've had 5 practices running a sustainability pilot program. We wanted to have someone from one of the practices speak at the national conference about their sustainability journey. Vets, nurses weren't that keen to stand up in front of 130 people and present. And so what we decided to do is to have a competition between the 5 practices. You had to make a 1-minute video or shorter, talk about your sustainability journey, and it had to be fun.
Hmm.
And we got 5 cracking videos that obviously, people, young people in particular, I'm showing my age a bit here, but they're great at getting on phone and making videos. They do it naturally. And so we had 5 cracking videos, and the competition was to show the videos at the national conference, get the audience to vote, and the winning team would get double movie vouchers to every team member. And the CEO was so impressed he just gave movie vouchers to everyone. But
Yeah.
interestingly, most of the practices were a bit disappointed because they didn't get to find out if they were actually the best video. So,
Yeah.
so that was a learning point for me as well. But yeah, I guess that therefore they had some fun of sorting rubbish and mucking around with their anaesthetic, et cetera, and making it interesting. So yeah, that would be an example of how we've got the team more engaged.
Perhaps just to finish, where do you see yourself going with this over the next year? Is there more to do in your own practice, or now that you're a part of a group, do you see yourself maybe trying to help other practices to improve and make savings?
No, I'm still very much involved in managing my own practice as part of the group.
Yeah.
We've sort of interesting, the whole net zero discussion I think you alluded to before we started is evolving. and there's certainly politically it's evolving. But the recommendation is to put most of your resources into emissions reduction, and then when you get to your last 10% of emissions, that you maybe buy some carbon credits and become net zero. So, but a lot of companies have been just buying carbon credits and saying, well, we're carbon neutral. I can just keep going doing business as
Yeah.
usual. Well, that doesn't really cut it either. And so,
Yeah.
I guess what we've been looking at in our practice is to simplify and streamline the carbon audit, and then we're moving away from the government registry, and we're looking to probably just buy carbon credits that relate to biodiversity restoration, and we've got a really good company in Australia doing that. And in actual fact, we had two of our vets went to a tree planting day run by this organisation. They had a great time. So it kind of fits in with, you know, some well-being activities for the team, and it also fits with our job as vets in terms of being advocating for a better future for animal health and a better climate, and restoring some biodiversity. So I think that's where we're going to head, is to a simplified carbon audit, and then looking at biodiversity carbon credits.
Jeremy, thank you so much. I think it's really great to see somebody like yourself with such a great message, getting that out to the vets in Australia. I know you've won various awards over there as well as with our Green Award. So please just carry on doing the work. It's really important, and it's great to see that sort of beginning to go even quicker with the other practices and the videos as well. So yeah, just thanks for all that you do for the planet, for the people, and of course all the animals as well.
All right, thanks very much, Anthony. Pleasure to be on the program.
Cheers. Thanks, Jeremy. And thanks everyone for listening. I hope to see you on a podcast or a webinar very soon. And if you've been inspired by this and you want some more advice, then obviously feel free to drop Jeremy a email. We'll leave his email address at the bottom. Or, of course, if you're in Australia, speak to VFCA with their climate program, or Vet Sustain in the UK, EcoVeto in France. There are these veterinary organisations that are now popping up all over the world, also in America, the Veterinary Sustainability Alliance in Canada. So there's some really good stuff going on. Do get involved, because to see and not to know and not to do is to not to know. So hopefully this will have enthused you to do even more in your practice and at home for the environment as well. Take care.